Hi there, Andre here from Peak Motorcycles. This video is my wrap-up video about the EICMA 2022 motorcycle show. So what I'd like to talk through is some of the bikes that were there, and then I've got 5 bikes in particular that I picked out as being my favourite bikes from the show. I don't expect they will be the same as anyone else's. I'm quite sure many people will be horrified or delighted at some of the bikes that I've picked. It's just a personal opinion from what I'd seen and what I thought was particularly interesting. So first of all, I think I'll probably just talk through a couple of the big bikes that came out. Unfortunately, neither of these actually made my shortlist of 5, and because there's been so much coverage in the media about them, they've almost been hyped up too much. I've seen them both, I've sat on them both. I think they're pretty good bikes, but then again, you don't really get bad bikes these days, not from the bigger, more established manufacturers at least. So the first one is the new Honda XL 750 Transalp. This replaces the old one that's been out of the range for a while, and it sort of slots in between the CB500X and the Africa Twin. The bike looked great, it's well spec'd, it's comfortable. It's a little heavier than the Tenere, which is perhaps the class leader at the moment. It has a few odd design choices, like having a low slung exhaust. It also only has 210mm of ground clearance, and even the Tenere's got 240mm. So I know it's only 30mm, it's not a big deal really, and honestly I don't think this bike's going to spend a lot of time on the trails. I know that some people have been quite annoyed about the fact that it only has tubed tyres and it's not available with tubeless. And it's 208 kilos, so it is heavier than the current Tenere. That said, it does make 90 horsepower, which almost puts it in a category above. It's sort of closer to being something like a KTM 890 than it is the Tenere. And though I've no doubt it's going to be a very popular bike, especially as a road-based tourer, it's not really for me. The next bike I'd like to talk about, which also didn't really make the shortlist, but it's had so much coverage that I thought it was worth a mention anyway. And that's the new V-Strom 800 DE. So this is the more adventurized version of the new middleweight V-Strom. So this 800 replaces the 650, and I think it's a big improvement over that. I quite liked it in the yellow and the blue, and it seems to be a comfortable place to be. There certainly seems to be a lot of space between the windscreen and where you sit, and I think all those things about it are great. What I think is not so great is the weight, and it's 230 kilos, and my suspicion is that's before you start adding sort of luggage frames and anything else to the bike. That kind of puts it up in the same weight bracket as my GS, except that the V-Strom only makes 83 horsepower. And I'm sure the 83 horsepower is fine for touring. But for me, it just didn't quite measure up. And when you look at some of the new improvements that have come on the Tenere 700 for 2023, I think this market sector is particularly competitive, and I'm not sure whether Suzuki have done enough. If you're a V-Strom 650 owner and you're looking to trade up to something, then maybe that'd be something on your list. I'd still quite like to try one, and if I get the opportunity to ride one either on-road or off-road, then I certainly will. So to the 5 bikes that were the highlights of my visit to EICMA 2022. First bike I'd like to talk about is the new Fantic Caballero 700. The Fantic have a tie-in with Yamaha, and Yamaha supply them engines for some of their other bikes. I think this is the first time there's been a Yamaha engine put into a Caballero, and in this case it's actually the same crossplane engine, the CP2 engine, that is in the Yamaha Tenere 700. I understand it hasn't been tweaked at all, so it's got exactly the same power and torque profile as you'd find in the Tenere, except now it's in a Scrambler styled bike in the Fantic Caballero. I think it looks really good, and it has a weight of 180 kilos, and that's fueled, so that's a good 25 kilos lighter than the Tenere 700, and a whopping 50 kilos lighter than the new Suzuki V-Strom 800. I'd love to have a go on one. I don't think it's now a nice adventure bike. I'm sure you could use it for that. I'm sure you could do some trails on it, and I'm sure you could use it for touring. But I think as a naked bike that's doing something a little bit different, while leveraging that 689cc twin from Yamaha, I think it should be a really, really cracking bike. I can't wait to try one. The only slight concern I have is where it's going to be priced. A lot of the Fantic range use the Zhongshan engines, which I'm sure come at a much lower cost of production. And given that it's already a fairly competitive sector, and I'd heard rumours that it might be at around £9,000, I think there's a lot of competition in that bracket, so it'll be interesting to see how well it does. The next bike I'd like to talk about is the Kove 450 Rally. So if you saw my video on this, these are 450 rally bikes that look very similar to the Fantic 450 rally bikes, which you could literally buy off the shelf and take them rallying apparently. Except that even though the Fantic ones are fairly well priced for what they give you, the Kove ones are even cheaper. I think in the UK, even the standard bike, it costs about £8,500, which might sound quite a lot, but when you look at the spec that's on it and what you can actually do with it out of the box, it actually looks really interesting. They also do a factory spec version that comes with a road book that you could just take rallying straight away, and I think that's close to 12,000. However, I think it's the standard one that's the most interesting to me. It comes with 3 fuel tanks, which between them are about 31 litres. One of those can be separated off as a water tank, which I think is part of the rally rules. But if you get the standard bike, it comes with all the lights, all the indicators, it comes with a TFT dash, it comes with ABS, so everything you need to get it road registered. And it only weighs 145 kilos dry. Now, I know if you put in 31 litres of fuel, that's going to get you up to sort of 180 kilos-ish, but that's only the same weight as the Fantic, probably with double the range and certainly a lot more off-road capability. And even fully fueled with those big fuel tanks, it's a whopping 30 kilos lighter than the current Tenere 700. The engine itself might sound a little lightweight. If you haven't heard of Zhongshan, they're one of the biggest engine manufacturers in the world. They also make the engines that go into the Fantic 500 bike, so the Caballero 500 has this same 450 single. The slight difference is that Kove have taken the engine and they've given it double overhead cams and a Bosch electronic fuel injection system, a remap and a performance exhaust, and that takes it from 39 horsepower up to 52. I know what you're thinking, 52 horsepower is still not that much, but you know what, in a bike that only weighs 145 kilos dry, maybe somewhere between 160 and 170 kilos, if you put some fuel in it, that's really about the same sort of weight as my Honda CRF 300 Rally, except it's making pretty much double the power. So I think that's a really interesting bike. I don't know a great deal about the brand. A couple of people have added comments saying that they've got Kove bikes and they really rate them. I know that GPX Moto are going to be the importer for the UK, and they say they can get spare parts for them as well. So yeah, that might be interesting to some folks, so check out the video on it. If anyone's got one and would like to give me some feedback, I'd be very interested to hear what you think about it. The next bike I'd like to talk about is the Aston Martin Special Edition Hyperbike. And this is the bike that's been made by Brough Superior. And if you haven't seen my video on it, Mr. Albert Costain, who is the Executive Director of Brough Motorcycles, was kind enough to give me a few minutes of his time to talk through it. Now, I'd only seen pictures of the standard Aston Martin bike, and it does look like something from the future. You know, it just looks nuts. And to see it up close, it's actually even better. This thing is just covered with carbon fibre. It's a 997cc V-twin that's made from, I think, two blocks of aluminium, all CNC machined, just to get it just perfect. And the engine itself just looks stunning. And on top of that, they've added a turbo. So this bike now makes, I think, 225 horsepower. It's got about the same power to weight ratio as a Formula One car. I mean, it looks proper nuts. And it doesn't have a windscreen. Instead, it's got this sort of vectoring thing at the front where there's an air intake that then forces the air up and over the rider. I've no idea what it's going to cost. I'm pretty sure that until I sell my house, I would never even have one. I think the standard bike's about £100,000. I can't imagine what the special edition is going to be. However, as a bike that was drawing the crowds and to see something that was really, really special at the show, I think that was pretty remarkable. The next bike I'd like to talk about is the new Ducati Scrambler 800. Now, I really like the old bike. I liked it so much that I've had one from new. It's not done a huge number of miles. I think I've done maybe 6,000 or 7,000 miles on it. But every time I ride it, it just brings a smile to my face. It's pretty simple. You know, it's an 800cc V-twin. The bike that I have doesn't have any electronics, doesn't have anything fancy other than ABS. But it's just a really, really fun bike to ride. And it was cheap and it was simple, and yeah, I love it. However, the new one, they've just tightened up the styling a little bit. The riding position seems slightly more comfortable. They've added a few styling cues like the cross on the headlamp. They've added a TFT dash because the LCD dash I had in mine, I admit, is a little bit basic. They've also added an electronics package to it. And yeah, the bike's been around for 6 years now, so it's probably due a refresh. And I think they've done a pretty good job on it. They've done a few different versions of it. There's a full throttle, there's an Icon, I think there's a night edition, and I think one other. But if you have a look at the video, I just think they're really nicely finished. If you want a Ducati but you don't want something that's going to terrify you or break the bank, then I think the Scrambler 800s really are worth a look. And the last bike in my top 5 from the show, and this might be no surprise, is the Royal Enfield 650 Super Meteor. So I was there for the unveiling and it looks really good. I mean, like really good. If you saw my video for the 350, you'll know that I really didn't think that was going to work. You know, a bike that weighs 200 kilos that makes 20 horsepower, to me makes no sense. It doesn't even sound fun. And when I rode it, I just couldn't stop grinning. It's definitely a different way to see the world from two wheels. You know, you're not going to be winning any races. You're probably not going to be overtaking anything that's moving at any speed. However, for a bike that's just fun to ride, I really, really like the 350 Meteor. So the 650 Meteor just looks like the next step up. It's taking the tried and tested 650 twin that's been used in the Interceptor and the Continental GT and put it in a cruiser frame. It's not a massive cruiser frame, you know, compared to some of the big cruisers that you see around it. It actually looks not small, but it certainly doesn't have those sort of massive epic proportions. Having said that, I think it's quite a nice looking bike. The fit and finish on them looks really good. You know, compared to my Scram 411, it's just really, really nicely finished. So I think that's carrying on what we've seen on the 350 Classic and the 350 Meteor already. Royal Enfield really seem to have got their act together. Pretty much every bike that's come out lately, I think, does really well. You know, they're priced really well, and now they've got the quality and the fit and the finish right. I think they're going to sell a load of them. They had two versions at the show. They had the standard one and they had the touring one that was fully accessorized up with screens and a backrest and luggage and all sorts. But I'm sure across that range, I think the bikes are going to be really, really interesting. And just from looking at the number of views that I've had on it, I'm not the only one. I think the 650 Super Meteor is going to be an absolute hit. So my bike of the show is, I think, the Kove 450 Rally. Now, if you've watched the channel for a while, you know that I'm sort of an adventure bike, dual sport sort of person. And while I have my CRF 300 Rally, there's not a lot of competition for that in the UK. However, I think this 450 really could be a missing link. It could be something that's what I'd like any middleweight adventure bike to be, really. You know, it's maybe a little bit down on power. You know, if it had maybe 70 horsepower, it'd be the perfect adventure bike for me. But you know what? 52 horsepower, 145 kilos dry, the ability to put 31 litres of fuel in it if you wanted to. I just think that sounds like a really good package. And for £8,500, I think that's pretty cheap. You know, I don't think there's anything else around there that really comes close to that. So I've bought one. It's going to be here in a few months' time, and when it is, rest assured that I'll be making some videos about it. I am slightly curious to see what the actual finish is like, and particularly the reliability and the availability of parts. Now, the importer has assured me that they can get parts within a few days with DHL from the factory. So yeah, really looking forward to seeing that bike when it finally arrives, and I will share it with you when it does. So that's it. I hope that's been interesting and useful. That's my very quick roundup of my top 5 bikes and some of the highlights from EICMA 2022. The next videos that I'm going to be doing are from Motorcycle Live in the UK. So if you want to see those, stay tuned to the channel and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.